we go. And we're going to go crank up the presentation. And let's see. I'm going to go here. Okay, yell if you can see it, Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just collected all kinds of stuff. It's amazing in the last 10 years how much things have been published on just the history of the solar system. It's interesting that there's a guy at Caltech who had an online class on the solar system, and what he did was we're now into launching things since 1957 into space, and so literally every planet in the solar system has been visited by at least one space probe. So he was able to do a survey of here's what it looks like is going in on our solar system. Well, this is going back in time, as you'll see, back before anything. And so there's a lot of highly speculative stuff here. But for example, this guy here, michaeltellinger.com, who has a whole slew of books here. Here is a picture of him, and here's all of these books. He took satellite photos, and in the satellite photos, he discovered in Namibia, there's you can see a picture here of this book. It says temples. That this temple here is the size of Los Angeles.
Oh.
There's 3 of them. This is in Namibia, and these appear to be mining sites, okay, which we'll come to. But it wasn't obvious that that's what they were until you had satellite photos and people looked at them and started to put 2 and 2 together. So that's just an example of what's going on. So here we go. Here's just some of the books that I picked up to look at here. Here's this thing of temples and the African gods. There is in the middle of one of these temples something he calls Adam's calendar, this is in Namibia, so it's the Stonehenge of South Africa, except that it's gigantic, okay? Stonehenge is nothing compared to this. And it's called Adam's calendar because this is probably where everything originated in terms of the birth of humanity coming out of here. So this is Adam, and there's a incredibly diverse set of circles of stone here. Here's one on the death on Mars that we'll come to, that this guy, again, he took a lot of satellite photos, and there's been landers on Mars, and he's looked at all the data and so forth. And this stuff simply wasn't available here, and so it goes. So here we go. The thing to do is to keep an open mind. So everything you've been taught probably is not true, but it appears that a reasonable hypothesis is that our solar system at one point might have had 4 habitable oxygen atmosphere planets with water oceans. One of them would be called Marduk, which was orbiting between Jupiter and Mars. Then there's Mars, which was between Marduk and Earth, which was between Mars and Venus Venus, which was in orbit between Earth and Mercury. So these are the 4 planets that appear here. Now, how did we come up with this? Well, we'll get into it. The thing to keep in mind is right now, no one knows how many stars there are in the Milky Way galaxy. Is it 100 billion? Is it 500 billion? I picked 250 just as a number. Okay, so there's 250 billion stars. And we now think, looking at all of the data that we have, that that a lot of these stars have planets, and a lot of the stars have multiple planets, so there might be 100 billion planets orbiting these 250 billion stars. 100 billion is a lot. And so in the age of the Milky Way galaxy is itself is measured in billions of years. So it's not unlikely that some of these planets develop life, some sort, and this spread to other stars and planets. And it could very well be that Earth has been seeded by not one, but maybe tens of extraterrestrial races that themselves, they've been at it so long, they're experts in genomics and in anything related to genetics, and this might be what's going on. We'll see as we get into it. Now, there's a classic science fiction movie came out in 1968 called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it's based on a short story that the science fiction writer Arthur Clarke wrote called A Sentinel. So in the short story, that's all I'm describing here, he says that millions of years ago, extraterrestrials visited Earth, and they saw things like gorillas and orangutans, and they felt that they could evolve them to a higher level of consciousness. And so they did what they could. In the movie, it's shown by this monolith, this black monolith slab here. And here you see some of the gorillas running around. Now, this monolith is probably still there on Earth, if you believe the story. But there was another one that was discovered on the moon in the story. And they discovered it because there was a huge magnetic field associated with this monolith, and the monolith was buried on the moon. So they dug it up, and when they uncovered the monolith, it was down in this hole, and it was such that the sun was rising over on the moon, and the sunlight struck the monolith and energized it in some way, and it sent out a signal. That's why the story was called The Sentinel. This is a sentinel, is sending out a message to whoever created this, to show them that they had gone to Earth, they tried to evolve gorillas and so forth. They made a test for it. The test was that you had to go to the moon and discover this other monolith. That was the test. If you couldn't do that, they failed. But in the story, they succeeded. Now, this movie, I remember seeing it in Christmas time of 1968, and it's 2 hours and 40 minutes. 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's ranked as one of the top 5 movies of all time. The special effects, which make up 70% of the budget of the movie, the special effects are still state-of-the-art today. So they were done in the middle 1960s, and they're still state-of-the-art. There's only 40 minutes of dialogue in the movie. In a 2 hour and 40-minute movie, there's 40 minutes of dialogue. So most of it is these incredible pictures. And you're just moving from picture to picture to picture. There's music in the background, but there's no dialogue. Is what's going on, and the net of it is the guy who did all the special effects. His name is Doug Trumbull. It's interesting. His father did all the special effects for The Wizard of Oz in 1939, 1940, and the special effects won an Oscar for 2001: A Space Odyssey. The problem was that it was also nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, and it didn't get an Oscar for those. So the director, Stanley Kubrick, said, okay, I'm taking the Oscar for the special effects. Too bad. It's all mine. So Doug Trumbull never got the Oscar for the special effects, even though he had a couple other guys with him, and they did all this incredible work. But
A lot of it's still secret, right?
well, they destroyed it all. He actually got a grant out of the British government, and he did all the filming in London. And when he finished, they destroyed. They took down all the sets. All the special effects are gone. So, but Doug Trumbull went on and did the special effects for all of Spielberg's movies. Yeah, E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Blade Runner. He did them all. And so Doug Trumbull got a special Oscar a few years ago for, incredible contribution to special effects. He really created all of it. So Lucas did a lot, but Doug Trumbull, Lucas was Star Wars, did a lot, but this is it. So the idea here that we're heading up to is that there could very well have been extraterrestrials that visited our solar system in the past. So there's examples of this scattered all over the place. The star Sirius shows up all over Egypt, and there's a tribe called the Dogon tribe in the middle of Africa, not Egypt, and they worshipped Sirius, and they in fact talked about how Sirius had several stars much smaller than the main star. Sirius is a group of stars, cluster of stars, and it was only, I think, in the 1960s, 1970s that the telescopes were good enough to actually see these other stars around Sirius. So how did this group in the middle of Africa that are basically, have drums and spears, and they're hunter-gatherers, they might grow a few things. How in the world could they possibly know that Sirius has 3 stars? And they talked about it, just like the Egyptians. So Sirius is in there for some reason. The Pleiades shows up, for example, in the Lord of the Rings. And there's a number of stars there in the Pleiades, okay? So Tolkien saw something there, or who knows, he was visited by someone from the Pleiades. There's a huge star, Aldebaran, and this star is known because there was a very dynamic woman in Germany in the 1920s who founded what she called the Vril Society. Vril is this great energy force, whatever you mean by Vril. And she started to commune with something or other, and they said they were from Aldebaran, and they gave her Sumerian texts. So why in the world, why would they use Sumerian texts unless they had gone and visited Sumeria? But why would they pick that of all things? Why not do it in German? So anyway, she downloaded all the stuff. She went into heavy duty trance and downloaded all the stuff. And then they got someone to translate it, and it appeared to be the plans for how to make a flying saucer without anti-gravity, which was really like, are you kidding me? And then she ended up working with the Nazis all through World War II, and apparently at the end of the war, actually got into one of these and left Germany, and who knows where she went. And the Germans did whatever they did with this as well. So that's Aldebaran. You have the belt of Orion. Orion has 3 major stars in the belt. And the problem with this is those 3 stars align perfectly with the Great Pyramid at Giza and 2 other pyramids that are there, except that the alignment takes place in 8,000 BC. 8,000 BC. So, why is that? And it just goes on and on. So there's hundreds of these contacts that have occurred, and it appears when they show up that they're some of them are trying to help humanity. They're trying to raise the consciousness to a higher level. And so humanity apparently has been interacting with these different alien species for all this time. And they've have a blending of all kinds of extraterrestrial genetic material in them. The other thing that comes out of this is just because these civilizations visited, they could very well still be floating around. You know, they could be, you know, have a base orbiting Saturn, for example. Who knows? So it isn't that they've gone away. And the other thing that comes up is, since there's so many of them, they probably had councils or federations that had to decide what to do at different points in time. So that's in general what comes out of all this material, all these different sources that we see here. We talked about Madame Blavatsky, and she talked about masters or guardians that actually are on every planet of the solar system. And she said that they encompassed 5 or more races that wanted to populate the solar system with a new race of loving, compassionate entities. And that shows up in her first book, Isis Unveiled, with the founding of the Theosophy Society. Let's go now to Marduk, okay? Marduk, which is supposedly this planet between Mars and Jupiter. The problem is when we look there today, all we see is a large number of asteroids and comets. There isn't any planet there. Well, this guy, Thomas van Flandern, was at the US Naval Observatory in Bethesda, Maryland. And in the 1970s, he used computers and he plotted the trajectories of many of these asteroids. And then he decided to follow them backward in time. And he discovered that roughly 3 million years ago, virtually all of these asteroids and comets emerged from a common point, which would be this planet Marduk, which was apparently 4 times the size of the Earth. So it got blown up. That's something to think about. Who in the world has enough energy to go blow up an entire planet? And why in the world would they want to do it? But that's our asteroid belt apparently came out of that. We go to Mars, and Mars, we've had all of these satellites and landers and so forth. And what's happened is 2 things. One is that they've looked at the matter that makes up the soil in Mars, and they discovered that there's a lot of isotopes that you'd only find from nuclear bombs. So Mars apparently underwent some incredible nuclear war of some sort, but it's actually worse than that. It looks like it's missing 1/3 of the mass of the planet about maybe 800,000 years ago. So somebody took a big asteroid and smashed it into Mars. The problem with doing this is that if Mars loses a lot of its mass, then what it has for an atmosphere and what it has for oceans and water, they're all vibrating, and their escape velocities now are much lower because the mass of the planet has been chopped off by 1/3. So the end result is that Mars apparently did have all kinds of oceans and rivers and probably life. The life could very well have come from Marduk, for example. But there's you know, really just a desert there now. But there are satellite photos that show that there are structures on Mars that are quite similar to those in the Olmec or Maya region of Mesoamerica. So this suggests that all of these planets, that the aliens, whatever, could have started on Marduk, went to Mars, went to Earth, went to Venus. that is a plausible scenario. We don't know. Venus is this enigma because when we finally sent probes there to look at it, it apparently has gone into some sort of thermal runaway event, and the carbon dioxide that's trapping all the energy from the sunlight has turned the surface temperature up to at least 700 degrees centigrade, which is enough to melt lead. So there really isn't any, if there were oceans and water and life on Venus, it's been toasted ever since. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't life there. There could very well be these entities that Ron saw that are based on dark matter, and they like energy, they like heat, they like to vibrate, and they could have spiritual energy. So there could be all kinds of spirits running around on Venus. The only problem is that we don't have any way to test that today, because all of our instruments only work in 3 dimensions, and it looks like these would be in a separate orthogonal 3-dimensional spatial space. So there's Venus here.
Well, there's all kinds of creatures at the bottoms of our oceans, where scientists insisted for years and years nothing could possibly survive. But those animals thrive on the pressure
Right.
that's down there.
Right.
There's one that has this funny little like arm that comes up with some kind of phosphorus light that lights its way, and they said, well, there's
Right.
no light down there, they couldn't possibly see. Well, this funny little crab has this
Right. Has a light. Has
light
a little,
that comes
has a
over.
headlamp. Yeah. Yeah. No, the problem with Venus is the probes that have gone there, that have landed on Venus, have only lasted for half an hour or an hour, and then they melted. So we need more than, just 1 or 2 1-hour shots. So here we're going to just go back into what happened here out of Namibia, out of southern Africa. So this is before there were Sumerians or Egyptians. These circles that we're talking about here, they might be 300,000 years old. No one's really sure, but they appear to be remnants of gold mines that were here. And in particular, there's more than 10 million stone circle ruins, all interconnected to one another. Okay, they're not standalone. So this is the largest cluster of stone ruins found anywhere on Earth so far. And the people that built these things apparently had a huge understanding of sound and resonance, and used the sound to power their tools, so that a lot of the stones are machined very, very precisely. And the sound also gave them their it was a source of energy for them. So this is a tip-off that we don't really know a lot. But in the middle of all this, they carved the first statue of Horus. They migrated to Egypt, and they built the Sphinx, apparently, and they built the first pyramids. And there was a stone calendar in the midst of it all, which is called Adam's calendar, and it ends up in the midst of all these ruins. It is aligned perfectly north, south, east, and west, as well as with the solstices here. And it appears to have been left behind by some group called the Anunnaki that were the ones doing all these mines. So this leads up to Earth, which could very well have been settled by these extraterrestrials, or many such races. And there is a book that is there, in a written book in Sumeria, the Enuma Elish, and it has about 1,000 lines, and it's on 7 clay tablets here. And what it says is that it has a whole story of how the universe came about. So it describes the creation of the world. The earth was created, but then there was a battle between the gods focused on an offering to some entity called Marduk. And man was created to serve these deities. In other words, humanity was created to be slaves, to do the work that the deities didn't want to do. And Marduk is the chief king in all of this. He ended up, doing all kinds of things here. It's not clear exactly what, but this in turn fed into this epic of Gilgamesh. So the Enuma Elish fed into the epic of Gilgamesh, and in this epic, Gilgamesh, which is Sumerian, is introduced as 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, which is interesting. What does that mean? How could he be 2/3 and 1/3? And at the beginning of this epic poem, Gilgamesh is described as a very brutal, oppressive ruler. And that usually is a hidden way of saying that there was forced labor or sexual exploitation, was really what Gilgamesh was doing. And so as punishment for his cruelty, the god Anu created Enkidu. And Enkidu was tamed and then journeys over to Uruk, which is the main town in Mesopotamia, to confront Gilgamesh. The two men wrestle. Gilgamesh wins in the end, but he's so impressed by the strength of his opponent and his tenacity that they become close friends. So in some Sumerian texts, Enkidu is Gilgamesh's servant. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, they are equal standing. So then we go through some more of these tablets. Gilgamesh and Enkidu travel here, there, and the other place. And then they finally return to Uruk, where Ishtar, which is the Akkadian name for Joanna, comes to him and demands him as her consort. And Gilgamesh rejects her and reproaches her because she mistreats all her former lovers. So he doesn't want to be one of those. So in revenge, Ishtar goes to her father and demands that he give her the bull of heaven, which she sends to attack Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull. That's the end of the bull. And Gilgamesh and Enkidu are resting. Ishtar stands up and curses Gilgamesh, and she tears off the bull's right thigh and throws, Enkidu does, and throws it in Ishtar's face, saying, "If I could lay hands on you, it is this I would do to you, and lash your entrails to your side." And Ishtar says that the courtesans, the prostitutes, and all the harlots, all of them mourn for the bull of heaven, which Gilgamesh and Enkidu just killed. And Gilgamesh is celebrating over the bull's defeat.
This has to be about the age of Taurus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, very much.
I'm gonna do this. Whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I think we should,
Hold on. Here it is. I know. So let's see. We're still in screen share. And so then the epic continues. Gilgamesh goes off to this other place, Pishtim, and has all kinds of things happen. But he encounters and slays lions, reaches the mountains, kills a scorpion man, and and so forth. It just goes on and on. So what's going on here apparently is the Anunnaki that we talked about had something to do with this epic. And they're the deities that were there in ancient Sumeria. And as a result of this, the Sumerians were writing about them, but this came well after the real activities took place. So the Anunnaki are all gods and descendants of An, the god of heaven, and Ki, the goddess of earth, Anunnaki. That's how they get their name. And they're there to decree the fate of humanity. One of the real key Anunnaki is Enki, and he appears to be the keeper of divine powers and also the gifts of civilization. So he is their chief technical wizard that does everything. Enki is depicted as having two streams of water flowing into each of his shoulders. One is the Tigris, the other the Euphrates. And alongside him are two trees symbolizing the male and female aspects of nature. So he's shown wearing a flounce skirt, a cone-shaped hat. An eagle descends from above, lands on his right arm. And this portrays Enki's role as the god of water, life, and replenishment. Could very well be that Enki came out of the water, just like Gilgamesh. Enki was considered the master shaper of the world, the god of wisdom and all magic, the lord of Abzu, the freshwater sea or groundwater that was located within the earth. So in the Enuma Elish, Abzu was the begetter of the gods. He's inert and sleepy, but he finds his peace disturbed by the younger gods and decides to destroy them. But his grandson, Enki, represents the younger gods and casts a spell on Abzu into a deep sleep. So he stays deep underground with these waters. And Enki subsequently set up his home in the depths of the Abzu, of the water. So Enki is apparently very closely tied to water. So this leads up to the Anunnaki could very well have been from another star, another planet, and came to the solar system. And it appears the reason they had these mines in place was they needed minerals, in particular gold, that they needed to mine. And Namibia and South Africa are loaded with gold. And so they came to Earth and set up these mines. And after they were going after it for a while, the Anunnaki decided that this was just too much work for them, and they were going to create some helpers using genetic engineering. And that became humanity. So Enki advises that they create a servant of the gods out of clay and blood. But instead of doing that, the gods decide to slay Kingu, and Enki finally consents to use Kingu's blood to make the first human, with whom Enki always later has a close relationship, the first of the seven sages or seven wise men, Ab, Galu. Ab is water, Gal is great, and Lu is man. And this Ab Galu was also known by this other name, Adapa. So Enki assembles a team of these divinities to help them create a host of good and princely fashioners so they could do all the work of mining the gold. Enki wrote a poem when he did all this. "O my mother, the creature whose name thou hast uttered, it exists. Bind upon it the will of the gods, mix the heart of clay that is over the abyss. The good and princely fashioners will thicken the clay. Do thou bring the limbs into existence. Nima," which is his wife and consort, "will work above thee. And the Nintu, the goddess of birth, will stand by thy fashioning. And, O my mother, decree thou its newborn fate." So this is the creation of humanity with Enki. Now, unfortunately, this gets out of hand. And the Enki has a half-brother named Enlil, and Enlil is actually the king or the emperor of the Anunnaki, and Enki is the chief technical person. So Enlil finds that these elements of humanity start to mate with the Anunnaki, and there's all kinds of terrible things that happen, all kinds of giants and all kinds of creatures that come out of this that are just terrible, and it interferes with their mining activity. So Enki and Enlil, first of all, sends drought and then famine and then plague, but none of this really works because Enki is thwarting his half-brother by teaching them how to counter these threats. Having said all that, the humans are still going at it, and Lil is going crazy. So he convenes a council of all these other Anunnaki, and they promise not to tell humankind that he plans their total annihilation. So Enki doesn't tell directly, but he speaks to him in secret through a reed wall, and he instructs him to build a boat in order to rescue his family and other living creatures from the coming deluge. And after the 7-day deluge, the flood hero frees a swallow, a raven, and a dove to see if the floodwaters have receded. They have, so they land and make a sacrifice to the god. Enlil is furious that his will has been thwarted yet again, and Enki is named as the culprit. But Enki explains that Enlil is unfair to punish the guiltless, and the gods institute measures to ensure that humanity does not become too populous in the future. So here you have a flood story. The ark that they're talking about here that saved everyone, it's not implausible, since this came with the Anunnaki, that they actually were spaceships, but they were gigantic spaceships to take a lot of people. And there were many of them, not just one. And so they all loaded up, moved out into space, then the flood took place, and then they came back to Earth. Over 200 different flood legends around the world are found. So the flood really was something that apparently happened in the distant past, and lots of people were killed as a result, but there were a number that were saved through these arcs. Now, go back to Enki. They're typically depicted as a man covered with the skin of a fish. And this shows up, his house is in the watery deep. That's where he lives. It suggests that he really is the god of the water, and he came out of the water. So nothing's known about this, about his temple or anything, other than he has this name that points to a stage tower or ziggurat with the temple of Enlil and Nippur. And other than that, the incantations and ceremonial rites in which water is a sacred element played a prominent part and formed a feature of worshiping Enki. So this race, Anunnaki, could very well live in water. They're partly fish, have gills. Then we have the Book of Enoch that's in the middle of all this stuff. And Enoch is the one, we'll just first of all cover the books. The first book is the Vision of Enoch. Enoch takes a journey through the heaven and encounters celestial beings. There's the Book of Watchers about fallen angels, which are the Watchers, and their union with human women, leading to the creation of giants. And then there's the Book of Parables, which is a collection of apocalyptic prophecies and teachings. So Enoch saw that the giants that had been created through the union of the aliens and the humans. And it was Enoch that told Noah to build an ark, if you go look in Genesis. And Enoch really was a negotiator. When he went up to heaven, there were all these different alien races, including the Anunnaki, and he was there to negotiate with them and as to how to cleanse the earth to have a restart for humanity. So these alien species apparently had councils or federations because each of them were different, and they needed to reach consensus as to what to do. And Enoch is really there to just provide an independent view of all this stuff.
And there is real archaeological evidence of
Yeah.
giants.
Yeah, no, there is. That these giants really did exist and so forth. Now, what's interesting about this is that Abraham, who lived in Ur, which is in Sumeria, he left and he went to Palestine. And so the cosmology and flood story that was in the Enuma Elish, that was in Sumeria, he took with him, and that became the basis for the Torah. And the Torah clearly has a discussion of the flood and the arks, that everyone was saved. There's yet another book that showed up about Sasquatch. So Sasquatch or Bigfoot, these are entities that have been seen from time to time. There's no real hard evidence that they exist. But here's a book that was written by someone who was in the Pacific Northwest of the US and has interactions with Sasquatch or Bigfoot. They have seen the footprints they can't identify. And one possibility here, if you think outside the box, is Sasquatch is actually an alien race. And the reason why we can't see them is they can simply shift into other dimensions, making them invisible. But they're really charged with being the preservers of the earth and helping humanity. And so Sasquatch says there are many past sentient races on Earth, initially aquatic, then insects, then reptilian, and now mammals or humans. That's what Sasquatch says. Well, here's what the Hopi say. The Hopi say the first people were fish, the next were ants, the next were reptiles, then they put in bird people. Sasquatch is in here, and finally we get humans, remarkably similar to what Sasquatch had to say. We go back to Africa, and the reason why we can know all this stuff is the space satellite photos showed in Namibia these three major circles, each the size of Los Angeles, that suggests that the Anunnaki had mines there. They were mining for gold, and they were apparently taking the gold back to their home planet, for whatever reason, and they created humanity as the slave race that would do the mining for them. So we have this calendar that we talked about. It's aligned with the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, west. It's aligned with the summer and winter solstice, and it's aligned to the north with the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And there is a Great Zimbabwe period. There's also the spring equinox sunrise on the eastern side of the calendar, has a 3-meter tall monolith carved in the shape of an Egyptian Horus bird. So the Horus looks at the 3 monoliths on the outer ring that are aligned with the rise of Orion's belt. So here you can see there's really a story here that's right in front of us that we never heard about. So the Stone Man monolith that stood in the calendar circle faces sunrise on the vernal equinox, and for whatever reason, a local forestry company removed this around 1992. But for whatever reason, they returned it in 1994, close to where they took it from. But all of the African shamans know all about this. This is the birthplace of the sun, where humanity was created by the gods. So it's curious that the calendar is referred to in the ancient Sumerian tablets now as the place of observing, which was built by Enki, who was the ruler of this gold empire in southern Africa. And in the same reference, the Sumerian text mentions sites that can be equated with the Great Zimbabwe and the Great Pyramid. And Enki was also known as the architect and creator of a new species. So here we go, we're closing the loop on all these things. South Africa and Zimbabwe are home to the largest clusters of these stone ruins found to date on Earth. It's relatively recent. The sun calendar was found. Since 2007, more than 5 million circular stone structures have been identified here. And the great mystery is that the original stone structures have no doors or entrances. So they're not originally constructed as dwellings for people or animals. The additional research has led to the discovery of tools and artifacts, except no one knows what they are, what they do. But they appear to be based on sound and use sound as a tool. He thought this originally was 75,000 years ago. It appears to be over, it's probably 300,000 years ago. This ancient and still functioning stone calendar is probably the most important archaeological discovery in the 20th century. And the problem with it is we know so little about it. Now, there's another thing that comes up here, which is where are pyramids? Pyramids appear to be all over there. So here's a map that you find in Google of here's where all the pyramids are. Notice there's pyramids clear up here, over by Iceland, whatever. There's no pyramids in Australia, no pyramids that we found in Antarctica or Greenland, but that doesn't mean there's none there. But notice there's a bunch of pyramids in China. The pyramids in Egypt, here are the Giza pyramid complex, these three, and they match with the alignment of the stars in the belt of Orion around 8,000 BC. And the pyramid of Djoser is in Saqqara, and it's considered to be the oldest complete pyramid complex, older than this. In Nubia, there's this complex of pyramids, for example. Why in the world was that built there? In China, here in Xi'an, is a white pyramid. This was discovered in World War II when the United States was an ally with China fighting Japan. This fighter pilot noticed a gigantic pyramid, all with white sides on it, here in central China. The Chinese refused to let anyone come in to look at this. And there's a bunch of pyramids here, but they're all distorted by the satellite photos. So there's something funny going on that people don't want us to know. Then there's, of course, pyramids in Mexico and Peru that showed up here. Okay, so we find pyramids all along the equator. So to summarize this, we end up with probably having a representative like Enoch that goes to deal with these different extraterrestrial races, and they have this council and that council and so forth. And but they all seem to follow this law of one, which is to love yourself and love your neighbor as yourself, so that everything in the universe connects on a higher spiritual level. And every action generates a reaction, positive or negative. So be conscious of your actions because they will affect others, and accept others for themselves. So this is what seems to bind all these different races or entities together. Humanity has been created by them. This law of one shows up with Ra. Ra is this Egyptian god. Ra is not really the name. There's some sound, but you can't. Ra is just the approximation to the sound. But the point is that there's this yin and yang that's there, that all are one. There's no polarity. There's no right or wrong. There's no disharmony. There's only identity, that all is one, and then one is love and light, light and love, and the infinite creator. That's what the law of one with Ra is. So we have, as a backup to this, the Egyptian pyramid texts, which have 9 major creators here. Ra is self-created, and there are many children that have prophesized that the children will displace the parents, perhaps multiple times. And that's really what happened in this epic Enuma Elish, that the elders were displaced by Gilgamesh and the others that were there. The same thing happens, though, again and again. It's not just in Gilgamesh. We had Abraham, who came from Sumeria. He was a descendant of Enoch. He carried the law of one, and he taught and spread it. And he carried this notion of Gilgamesh and these extraterrestrials there. However, when Abraham went to Palestine, the problem that happened here was there was one particular Anunnaki called Yahweh, and he decided that he wanted to dominate humanity through fear and power. And so the Hebrew scholars wrote that Yahweh was the one all-powerful God, which is not what the law of one says. It's a distortion of it. The law of one is love, compassion, forgiveness, and understanding. It's not hatred. But this led to the hatreds of all the other tribes that were there in Israel. It goes on. We go to India, there's a council of gods. There's Vishnu, there's Brahma, there's Shiva, and then there's many, many children, gods and goddesses here. And there's an ocean out of which the universe is created, and this pantheon of gods arrive. So again, a common theme of many races, many gods, and then a council where they decide things. The Greeks were the same way. They had Uranus, who was had Kronos as a son. Kronos supplanted Uranus. Kronos was supplanted by Zeus, his son. And then Zeus became the leader of a pantheon of gods, many gods and goddesses, and they all were interacting or interbreeding with humans, apparently. So when we go to the Trojan War, it all started when there was an apple thrown in the middle of the gods, and the most beautiful goddess gets the apple. That's what caused the war. And so it goes with humanity mirroring this stuff. So the takeaway here is that our solar system, where we live, is a pretty dangerous place, because there were 4 apparently habitable oxygen atmospheric planets, and 3 of them are gone. And we're sitting here trying to destroy the 4th one all on our own, which is not a good thing. So with that, we're done. There's again, more and more of this stuff is coming out, and I think it will gel. This is one thing where something like artificial intelligence can help, because it will be very systematic and comb through all these different things and come up with a common story that explains what's going on. But it appears that the story is multiple races. They form these councils. They come to Earth and add to the genome of humanity again and again. Who knows how many have come here? And then that leads to everything else. So with that, we're done.
Wow.
Marjorie?
Any questions?
Wow. A lot of work.
Well, you can see these people, again, this stuff didn't exist 10 years ago in terms of being accessible, and it's mind-boggling what's happened.
Well, the satellite photographs are really interesting.
Yeah, and the satellite photographs on Mars, there, and with Mars, for example, the Russians sent a probe. Mars has these 2 very small moons, Phobos and Deimos, and the Russians decided to send a space probe to look at each of them. And when it got close to one of them, all of a sudden the satellite that they sent quit functioning, like it got shot. So what you think of as a moon there could very well be some sort of cannon that's pointed at you on some sort of spaceship. And the you know, you have Jonathan Swift, when he wrote Gulliver's Travels, he wrote about the moons of Mars. Now, how in the world could someone in the early 1700s even see the moons of Mars, let alone know that they were there?
Yeah.
So
Right.
it just goes on and on. There's more and more things like this floating around.
Well, I love the people who are so sure. And so sure that they know. And well, it's like saying, well, no creatures can, you know,
Yeah,
life can't be sustained at the bottom of the ocean. There's too much pressure. Well, there are creatures that are designed specifically for that pressure, and they thrive down there. And it's the same, we think every living creature needs oxygen. Maybe they thrive on ammonia or something else.
right.
And I would say with infinite odds, anything is possible. And
Yeah, it's the sheer numbers. The fact that there's so many planets on so many stars that suggest something happened. And when you're dealing with the time scale of millions or billions of years, it doesn't take, it's just a little snippet of time, 10,000 years, and you've gone to anti-gravity and all kinds of amazing things with genetics,
there's apparently infinite space and eternal time. So anything's possible.
right.
I think if they are traveling, I don't think they're using rockets. They're never depicted as rockets.
Now, there were some examples of rockets. For example, in Jordan, there's this what really looks like a launch pad carved out of stone, and it has when you have rockets, you have to watch where when the thrust goes down, they actually deflect it out to the side so that the launch pad itself won't blow up. And that's what they built there. So somebody was using rockets, but
I mean, on other planets.
yeah,
here,
no, I
they're
understand. Yeah, I'm just saying that more than likely, most of them were totally different. And the problem is that they've all disintegrated. We don't know what they had there. So
Well, the other possibility is that there are races where they had people who could meditate like my brother did.
right.
And rather than travel in space by rockets, they just do it mentally.
Right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. No, that's what I think a lot of this is they can simply, through deep meditation,
yeah,
effectively, that's why we spend time talking about this 26-dimensional space. Well, what if you could step outside of the space? Okay, which is effectively what you're doing with this deep meditation. You're going outside, and now I look and I say, I want to go over here.
And you
So boom, you're there.
You fold it up somehow.
You're just you could potentially be in two places at once. One where you started from, and one where you wanted to be, and you could have a meeting with whoever it is. None of this is to be determined. So,
well, I'm just saying there's another dimensions on the inner world that
right.
we're on experience that
Right.
could we're still in the Stone Age compared to some civilization somewhere else where they thought that was commonplace, and they just they all knew all about us, and that we're still in the Stone Age. You got to wait for another,
Sure.
Well, I think to me, the real question is, how do you stop us from killing each other? Just being so hell-bent on doing that. Why that's such a goal? Why?
Yeah, but killing each other is still the Stone Age for human beings.
Right.
You could get races of beings who are not into hatred and all that stuff.
right.
They're
It
beyond
would
it.
just be impossibly primitive. You
Yeah.
could see it. It would be like, I don't know, eating your own children. You just wouldn't do it. And
But there are races that are probably into the law of one, love and compassion, and we're still in the Stone Age because we still shoot at each other.
Right.
I can
Yeah.
well imagine that. But I suspect, for example, there are beings on Earth who have actually communicated with these people, but they don't talk about it because, first of all, nobody would believe them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's lots of things you'll see on the web with people, that get visited or contacted, and
Yeah.
they can do this bilocation trick, and so they're here on Earth, but they bilocate to the spaceship. It's
Yeah.
up wherever. There's lots of things like this you'll see on the web. But it doesn't get the press. There's no press.
Yeah,
coverage.
right. But yeah.
So they say, well, how are you going to prove you did this?
Well,
You can't bring anything back. You just went there and you come back. Here I am. But you can tell them, I saw this, I saw that. So what?
yeah. But the thing is all you need is 10 people like Ron who
Right.
come up with the same story,
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
people out there that are
I
like
think
that.
we'll end up having, it could be people, it could be some sort of technology that'll assist people in doing this, to have a magnifier, an amplifier of some sort. But we'll see.
Yeah.
well, maybe they're waiting for us to evolve more before they reveal these techniques.
Oh.
So that we're, capable of being responsible and using them well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're going through a transition now to reach a higher state and not go ahead and kill everybody in sight. So we'll see.
Well, I got a ways to go.
Yep, I agree.
I'm really worried about democracy.
Yeah, especially, yeah. Yeah, how are you guys doing down there? Can you still vote? Sorry.
We might end up voting, but it doesn't matter because the results are already there.
Well,
Oh,
if people
yeah.
are gonna vote the way they vote, what can you do?
Yeah,
Oh,
Sorry,
well.
right.
it's the way I see it. It's, kind of like the notion of free will. It seems kind of wasted. This is,
Right.
this is what we want to do with it.
So that's it for tonight.
All right.
We'll catch you next week.
All right.
Have a good
Good one, yeah.
enjoy.
Stay warm in Toronto.
Yeah.